Hello, fourth and long fans. It's your AFL correspondent, Donnie Hess here, back with another part of my interview series going across the United States, trying to find AFL fans throughout here in the States here. And today I am joined by the awesome Ian McCormick. Ian, how you doing, sir?
Doing well, Donnie. Happy to be here. Let's go Pies.
Awesome, awesome. So, and just right out with it, right out with it. So let's not even waste the time. Let me guess. I'm taking it. Since the people that are watching the video, they most likely already know who's your club.
Collingwood Magpies, calling the Pies.
Awesome, awesome. It's you come right out with it. You're not even wasting your time. You're making sure everybody that listens to this knows you're a Pies fan. So we already know you're a Pies fan. Let's hop on to it. Just a little bit about, just kind of a little bit about who Ian McCormick is outside of footy.
Yeah, I figure you didn't get me here to see my pretty face, and I'm not here to look at yours. We're here to talk pies. No, yeah, as said, my name's Ian McCormick. I am 30 years old. I grew up in Western Massachusetts. For all the American listeners, Red Sox, Patriots, Celtics, Bruins, diehard sports fan. Grew up playing every sport under the sun. And now I'm down in Richmond, Virginia. I'm the president of football operations for the RVA Lions. Many of you listeners might know Darren Green. He's the founder of the RVA Lions. He recruited me into this, and that's what I do in my free time. Professionally, I'm a software salesman, but that's an ancillary part of my life. I'm here to talk footy, sports, and pies.
Awesome, awesome. So I gotta ask, you big Pies fan, but how did you find footy? How did a guy from Massachusetts who now lives in Virginia, how did you find footy?
Well, I was fortunate enough when I graduated high school. I went to boarding school and got accepted to college, and I decided to take a year off before I went to Tulane University. And I moved to Australia, and I took a job at Geelong Grammar School. Famous Prince Charles studied there for a year. The current Prime Minister of England, Boris Johnson, did the same thing I did. I was a gap teacher at an Australian secondary school, teaching outdoor education and math for a year off in the bush at their Timbertop campus, and being in a Victorian school off in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of 14-year-old boys. I got stuffed with a football in my hand right away. From day one, it was kick to kick. There was no more going long and playing two-hand touch football. It was footy all the way. So I got a crash course in AFL from day one.
That's a cool story. I
Yeah.
love hearing all these different stories from all the different people and how they get it. I've known several people that said that they picked it up in Australia when they came back. They loved it so much it was hard for them not to get back to it. So the people that are actually watching the video, they can kind of see you're all decked out in your pie stuff. So I gotta ask, how would you say you would express your fandom? Are you a diehard that gets up early and watches the games early, or are you I'll sleep in a little bit and I'll watch it a little bit later. Like, explain to me your fandom of the Pies.
Yeah, I've gone through different tiers in my life. I've been watch AFL subscriber for the past 10 years, and before I had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, I was up at 2:30, 3:30, 4:30, 5:30 for pretty much every game through my college years and bachelorhood in my early 20s. I was watching pretty much every Pies game live that I could when my job allowed me. And this past year, I watched every single game. Obviously, I would say probably 60 to 70% starting right at live, and the rest maybe an hour too late. Um, when I do watch something not live, I pause all the notifications on my phone. I unfollow Collingwood on Twitter. I block the AFL subreddit and the Collingwood subreddit on my phone so I don't get any surprises. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. But yeah, watch as much as I can live. This year I watched probably between 80 and 90%, I'd say, of all AFL games weekly.
That's crazy. You make sure you aren't getting any spoilers. I wish I had that much dedication to do that, but I think that's kind of the reason why I always made sure that I was up early and watched it on time because I didn't want to go through the hassle of making sure I didn't get any spoilers. So I got to admire that determination for that. So going off that, an amazing fan there. So I got to ask, favorite pie, and then do you have a favorite pie of the past?
Yeah, favorite pie currently is Pendle's. I went to Australia in 2008, a couple years after he drafted, just made the senior list, and have been following his career and captaincy since it went from Nick Maxwell on. Then Pendle's picked it up a few years later and has carried the torch since. I've been watching him basically since he made that senior list and loving it. A lot of people I think would say, "Oh, American, he's going to go Mason Cox." Love me the big Cox, but I would have to say Pendle's my favorite current player. When I first got started, like I said, late 2000s, it was a team of like really, really great people. Alan Didak was one of my big favorite players. I like a good full forward. I'm only 5'9" myself. I play kind of in the pocket up front. I like to kick some goals from the sideline. That brought me Leon Davis was a big, always great to watch. So fast, so quick. Some of those crazy kicks from the edge. Daisy Thomas was a big player for them back then that I really enjoyed watching. And steeped in the history of the Coventry brothers, Sid and Gordon, Peter Dykos, the Macedonian Marvel, would be definitely someone I've enjoyed watching the highlights from.
Great. So I got to ask, going off that, and you kind of use the name, is one of the few people that's ever done it. Is Dale Daisy Thomas decided to go over to Carlton. So I got to ask, when it happened, were you one of those Carlton fans that were like, he's dead to you? He's no longer a Collingwood player because he's a bloody Carlton, or were you kind of like, you missed him, but you respected the decision?
Well, I was happy he was trailing off in his skill set anyway. We got rid of him on his way out, so that was fine with me. I always respect the time people put in with their club, but I mean, Collingwood is an incestuous affair. They pretty much invented the father-son rule. It's a family affair, tight-knit group, player, coach, and president. They always keep it in the family through good choices and bad choices, like Tony Shaw coaching or Nathan Buckley coaching. But it always stays in the family. So to see someone hop over to the Blues, or someone leave to Essendon, isn't quite the same as it is for other clubs when they lose them to a rival. Like I said, I'm a Red Sox fan, and seeing Jacoby Ellsbury go to the Yankees was definitely not right in my mind, but respected what he did. But I definitely threw away my Ellsbury jersey.
Yeah, it's those passions run deep. Those passions run deep. So going off of that, this season, as a Pie supporter, kind of what are your thoughts of this last year? I mean, I know it was kind of a roller coaster at times and all that, but kind of what were your takes from this season?
It ended like it started. It was, I mean, losing by that much to Geelong was kind of emblematic of, and after the first round win, going to Optus, going to West Coast, taking out the Eagles in a real stunner fashion. Everybody had already written off Collingwood, but that was very emblematic about how the season went. I mean, we suffered so many injuries throughout the year. Losing Jeremy Howe was a big one with the knee early. DeGoey missed a heap of matches. We had a lot of players coming in and out of the list, and we barely played the same 22, I don't think, more than 2 or 3 times all season. So you never knew what you were going to get in a match, which I've found has been pretty consistently the case for Collingwood over the past decade or so. Is they're a chance for every single game. They're always a chance for every single game. But right when you think they should be playing their best, they just throw up a stinker on you. And this whole season was kind of hovering on the edge of the top 8, in and out, in and out. We never came up in the 1, 2, 3. We were never a chance for a bye. Home field didn't even matter. They weren't playing in Victoria. So it was all a crapshoot. But I'd say they went out the way they came in, with a bang than a whimper.
Yeah, and this was just the year of just weird injuries. Howe's random knee injury, just on a freakish accident, and then who was it that had his shin ripped open during the game at the Swans?
That was Isaac Quainar.
Yep, Isaac Quainar, and the fact I remember watching that game, and I'm like, what is going on for the longest time? And I found out the next day that he had his shin split open. There was like a
8-inch gash.
8-inch gash. Yep.
For a couple of days, it was Cleatgate. They were taking. Zooming in on pictures of the cleats.
Yep.
Those metal signs.
Yep, Sam Wicks was the one who was on it, and they later talked to him. Is they basically found out that they thought that he had metal studs because those are illegal, but they actually were plastic. They were just they had been run on so much that they almost made a sharp point, and they just hit him just right. So
Yeah, so that
it's
was a
one of the
nasty
weird.
one.
It's one of the weirdest things. And it was like, and Collingwood, I completely agree. It was one of those teams where it was like, as soon as you thought you had him figured out, they threw you a curveball. I mean, I'll put my hand up. I thought there was no way they were going to go to the West Coast and win that game. And
No, no one did.
when I watched the highlights, and I was just like, this was not the game I was expecting to watch. And then I'm like, I went, okay. When they came back and then played in that elimination final, I was like, oh, don't tell me they're going to. And it was like I almost called it. I could not believe that they went from one extreme to the other. They were just the injury list killed them. They just could not get any consistency. And then they also had issues with COVID breaches. I know Buckley had his one that everybody lost their mind over. So it was
I
just,
hate to get a game of tennis in.
I know it was just it's such a weird season for the Pies. And then going off of weird, almost a interesting transition here for me is that this off season, have you been keeping an eye on it at all? And what are your thoughts on just the absolute, I mean, I hate to say it this way, fire sale that the list manager decided to do with some of your more elite players?
I wish we could just like throw a meme up in the chat here, just a dumpster on fire. It's been absolutely a shocker. I mean, Ned guy he must be living on a different planet. I'm waiting. The draft is tomorrow, and I'm looking at it, and he said it's about the draft. It's about the draft. It's part of our strategy. I'm going. There is nothing you can do tomorrow to make this any better. I still don't even know what's going to shake out with the whole Trelawney deal. Like, I love Trelawney, love Jaden Stevenson. I could see getting rid of Stevenson. He was up and down. There's some like trust issues there. It's like an ex that is maybe a little verbally abusive to you. You don't know if they got their head on straight. You should give him another chance. He was a rising star that really kind of did wrong by everybody a little bit, and is injury prone, soft tissue injury. So Stevenson, I can see to an extent, but the way they treated the players on the way out, who's going to want to come to Collingwood, right?
Yeah, and it was just so interesting too. And then the fact that Stevenson kind of burned the bridge on his way out, going on SEN and saying all things. I think the most interesting part about the Stevenson deal was the add-in of R2. That one surprised me a little bit. I thought he was playing pretty well with Collingwood. I thought he's a young guy you can build on with the Isaac Quainas and the younger Dacos, and then I mean, I know everybody in Collingwood is looking at the younger of the Dacos brothers coming up in next year's draft. So I can kind of see why their list manager was doing that, but it was scorched earth kind of response to it, which I was a little puzzled by. Of the two big ones of Stevenson and Trelawney, which do you think was the harder one to accept, shall we say?
I think I kind of tipped my hand a little bit there with Trelawney, but I mean they were stuck between a rock and a hard place with the cap coming down, list sizes coming down,
Mm-hmm.
and they just back ended a ton of contracts. When you look at it, they owe a lot of people a lot of money. It's kind of things you see in like the in NBA or in the NFL where they kind of back end the quarterback's deal, take less money now to win a Super Bowl and figure it out later. Well, they were playing around in a much smaller salary cap and just have so many people's contracts come and due that it's untenable. And Collingwood just has this knack, and I mean this is squarely on that guy to give someone a new deal right when they're at the peak of their performance. Right? You got Maya Check on a big deal. You've got Mason Cox on a big deal. He kicks 5 goals in the final, 3 goals in the final, and then all of a sudden he's a $600,000 a year player.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's someone who wasn't even on the list between rounds, I think, 6 and 12.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just paying big money and handing out deals at basically the peak of someone's value rather than buy low, sell high. They're just buying high and going for a ride.
Yeah, well, and the worst part is that they agreed with Brodie Grundy before the season started to kind of extend with his contract, and now there's wondering if they're even going to be able to honor that contract because it was signed pre-COVID. So, I mean, it's just, Brodie Grundy this year, unfortunately, I hate to say it, did not have his prototypical year that he's used to. So now I'm seeing questions of his did Collingwood re-sign Brodie Grundy instead of moving him or letting him go? So it's just
Yeah.
so much controversy. I mean, it's unfortunately for such a great club and for a club that's got so much history. I think neither trade was handled really well. I agree with you. I think Treloar is going to hurt more because he was so good. Plus, you send him to the Western Bulldogs, who now, in some situations, might have the most elite midfield in the entire league. I mean, so it's absolutely insane. So that deal, I just, even the trades, I don't think they got the return that they probably should have for the names that they moved as well.
Yeah, I mean, everybody knew Collingwood was desperate. They had him over a barrel with all the deals. I mean, they had to move someone, and you see that with the way the whole Treloar thing is still shaking out. They're still trying to figure out who's going to pay what when, and they haven't figured it out. The picks have traded hands. Treloar can't come back to Collingwood, and it's now draft day tomorrow, and no one knows who's paying what, how much.
Yeah, it's just so crazy. So going from that section, being December, we were already kind of talking about the draft, and I think are you going to keep an eye on the draft at all tomorrow? I know it starts at like 2 or 3 in the morning your time. It starts 2 a.m. my time here in Iowa. Are you going to keep an eye on the draft, or are you going to kind of just get your list tomorrow morning? I mean, kind of what's your deal with that, since we have the draft
Yeah,
tomorrow
no,
morning of
I'm
recording?
not. I'm not that diehard that I'm going to stay up just to watch the draft. I do now work during the day, even though if it is from home, I'm getting a busy day tomorrow. I will collect what goes on in the early rounds in the morning. Collingwood do have the most picks in the draft as of now. We'll see what shakes out trade wise. I know we've been doing some 2-for-1s, like Brisbane around the 60th pick today, and so there's been some moving and shaking, but we have a lot of selections. I think the other big thing difference between like American sports and Australian sports is very rarely do you draft that impact player who makes a difference in their first season, right? AFL drafts are a bit more of the long game, so they take a little bit longer to shake out. A lot of players that get drafted don't end up making lists. More of like the baseball kind of model than, your number one overall pick isn't LeBron James in the AFL typically. But depending on what we have to match and to do with get Reef McInnes, that should be a good one. I'm excited to that. But as we mentioned before, I'm more excited for next year's draft with the next Dykos kid to come up.
Mm, yeah, and it's definitely, and I kind of agree. It is one of those where it's like the top 10 draft picks are usually the ones, if they're AFL ready, they're going to be there. They're not going to be anything after 10. You kind of start getting to the point where there's a little bit of development and different stuff like that. It definitely is. It's a very interesting draft this year because normally it's midfield dominated, and the top of the draft tends to be a lot of talls on both ends of the ground. So it's going to be very interesting to see the several of these teams with a lot of picks try to move up. Well, definitely with the live trading is definitely going to be interesting. So moving from the men's game is I'm always one of those, I love watching the women's game. Unfortunately, my club does not have a women's team, so I'm still kind of a free agent until they get one. Are you a AFLW fan at all? Are you interested in watching the game? Do you keep an eye on that at all? Kind of what's your connection to AFLW at all?
I watched more Bulldogs AFLW games than Pies with Aaron Phillips there. But that being said, I haven't dove super deep into the AFLW game. I have a finite amount of time, and it goes pretty much all to the Collingwood Magpies men's team. That being said, as it gets to be a more robust competition and there are more games available on that Watch AFL, I mean, I'm definitely going to be tuning in just for uh, just because it's there, right? It's just more
Mhm.
footy is more footy. I don't really care who's playing, but as far as it's permeated into my viewing habits, it hasn't got there yet, but I'm sure it will shortly once there's a bigger season, more matches, and another excuse for me to flip on the footy.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it. And Danny Marshall being at Western Bulldogs and having that USAFL connection has always been kind of one of the most common answers that I get with a lot of them. So kind of wrapping up here, but this is always one of my favorite ones, just because I love hearing some of the different answers. Is favorite game you've ever seen? Doesn't have to be a Collingwood game. It can be if you'd like, but favorite game you've ever seen.
Well, I think I have two answers to that. I think my favorite game I've ever seen might have been my first one, just for the pure raw experience of it. So I landed in Melbourne, and I was staying at a hotel just next to the airport, and I got off the plane, put my stuff in the hotel room, and I was like, I'm just going out. I was 18. I was ready to go tear up the town in Melbourne. Went out, had a night, woke up the next morning, and I was like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. I have 3 days till I have to be up in Mansfield, Victoria, which is like 2 hours north, to start my job. And I had no idea what to do. So I was just picked up a paper in the lobby, and it said match at the G, and it was a Hawthorn Richmond game. I think it was, if I had to guess, see, I would have got there in like July. So probably like round 6, round 7, something like that. Just a regular season game, but bought a ticket on game day, went up, sat probably in the second or third deck at the G, and grabbed a meat pie, grabbed a Carlton Draft, and sat down next to these bogans in the rafters, and they just explained. They were explaining the game to me. There were some Hawthorn fans over here, and the two guys behind me were Richmond supporters, and I'm outgoing. I just turned around and I go, "Hey, they're you American?" I said, "Yeah, I'm American." He goes, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, but you got to tell me what's going on, because I don't know what the hell this is." I had no concept of footy. I had no idea what AFL was, but I knew I liked sports, and I just fell headfirst into it. So just sitting there with a cheesy grin on my face, with a meat pie and a beer. Probably had about 4 beers and 2 meat pies. I was like, "What is this? This is the life." And watched my first footy game. So I'll never forget that. Along with when I saw Carlton play St. Kilda at when it was Etihad, now Marvel, on my birthday later that year, or the next year, start of the next season in March. Saw a round 1 game there, and so those are two highlights. And then my favorite that I've ever watched would have been the first round, or not the first round, but the first playing of the grand final in 2010. That draw against St. Kilda. Not really fully realizing the scope of what was going on, that a grand final could tie. I was still fairly new in my fanhood at that point, and it blew my mind just watching them all collapse on the field, real as it just sunk in that we got to do this again next week. And that was just such a brilliant game. I mean, I think if you look at some of the rankings out there, it's definitely one of the top 5 grand finals ever played. And that was my first experience with my team in the grand final. Happy to have won it a week later. First one in 20 years. But yeah, that first 65-65 tie against St. Kilda was just something else. Watching Nick Rewalt go up against the Pies back line, and watching some of those guys go after it for the Pies that I mentioned earlier was truly an experience.
Yeah, and that was my second full year kind of watching the grand final again. And I remember going to our grand final party and just this stunned, even in our group, we were all looking at our Australian going, "What's going on? What's going on?" He's like, "Oh, they're coming back next week." We're like, "Really? Kind of anti okay. Are we gonna party again?" And we just, yeah, there was just this stunned silence, because we had no idea that there was a replay. We thought, "Oh, overtime? Yeah, no,
Yeah, right.
no, okay, all right." Well, so the next week we're all sitting at home. None of us wanted to get together again because we'd already had the party. So I remember watching my living room, and almost kind of being a little disappointed, just because they wasn't as good as the week before. The first one was just so good, and the second one was St. Kilda just did not show up in that game. So definitely another one that I completely agree with that one. That was a great game. Ian, this has been a pleasure sitting here chatting with you, having some connections with the USAFL and hearing kind of your stories on the Pies. And I love kind of hearing different people's opinions on how their club's doing in the off season and all that. So it's been a pleasure, sir. If you want to, do you have any connections with your Facebook, Twitter, anything on your internet? So then if fellow Pies fans that maybe watch this, that want to start following you, can I get a hold of you?
Yeah, no. Look up Ian McCormick, Richmond, Virginia. Always happy to talk the Pies. I'm on Facebook. Don't do a ton of the social media. Got a busy life at home, but always happy to talk Pies. And the RVA Lions, if you're in the North Carolina, Richmond, DC, Maryland area, stay tuned. We're gonna be hosting a Mid-Atlantic Cup coming up this year. We've had the DC guys come down, Baltimore, Dockers come down, and Raleigh comes up as well. We have some AFLW and some men's games going on. Date TBD, COVID pending, but the Mid-Atlantic Cup will be in Richmond again at Glover Park this year. Love to see anybody come out. Stay tuned for details and follow the RVA Lions on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter.
Awesome, awesome. And I know I've chatted with Darren a few times. I said, hopefully crossing our fingers and maybe we can get you guys out to, we have our 80-35 tournament here where we bring in Minnesota, Denver, Chicago. And I think I've been really kind of getting on our board about maybe expanding it, not just to the Midwest clubs, but maybe East, North, and South. So the invitation's always there. If RVA ever wants to send any guys out to our 80-35 tournament, it's a 10-on-10 tournament. You get at least 3 games. I think it'd be so much fun to be able to bring more and more footy players into the Des Moines area, just to be able to get them that experience. And maybe we can even trade it. Maybe we'll come out there and come out to Richmond and play you guys as well too. So sound like a deal?
Love it. Sounds good to me.
Awesome,
Gonna live
awesome.
Collingwood forever. Let's
All
go.
right, all righty, sir. You have yourself a good night. We'll talk to you later.